thinking about this question of how the public realm can really be used 365 days a year, 24/7, 365, especially in a climate like Toronto. On the one hand, I sort of think, well, you should actually plan for the 320 days a year where it's pretty good, right? So on the one hand, I think, I don't know if we need all these underground paths.
Right.
I don't know if we need to do a lot of special thinking about it, because if we focus on the majority of time and try to make that really good and don't plan for the exception, then we actually might have that everyday usage that will make the city feel good most of the year.
Right.
And maybe some of the exceptions times we won't have it, and the extreme weather conditions. But what do you think about that?
Well, I guess there's two thoughts on that. I think Toronto and people that live in Toronto have actually done a really good job of animating public space in the winter when people would consider it to be inclement weather. And we're constantly amazed at the amount of use that we actually have in parks in the dead of winter.
Yeah, so like
and
markets
absolutely,
or ice skating.
Ice skating. So we have, in the core, what's now considered the core, we have probably, I may be making up the statistic, but we think it to be true, the largest number of artificial outdoor ice rinks located in public parks, probably in any city in Canada.
Wow.
And this is something that started like way long ago in the city of Toronto, where people really like to participate outside in skating.
Yeah.
And they built all of these rinks, and we're now in the process in many parks, in even in the core, of redoing those rinks so they're not just hockey rinks anymore, but we're doing leisure skating paths and all kinds of things so that they really, really become animated. And even when that's not enough, because the skating phenomena in Canada is so huge, especially in the winter. Here, by the time you're 2 years old, you've got a pair of skates on. We also have a huge natural ice rink program in a lot of parks where people take tennis courts, and community groups do, and we give them a hose and we help them along at the beginning. And they make tennis courts or parking lots or different parts of the park. They make them into these natural ice rinks, and then the community comes together and actually, is responsible for ensuring that the ice is kept up. And all we really give them is a couple of lessons on how to make ice and a hose, and that seems to do it for the winter.
But I think that's brilliant, because if you can leverage that natural tendency and desire for something, right? And then if you allow that energy, enthusiasm to really come out, and then maybe help it along, right? Make the permitting process easier, or like you say, train them in certain things, or even adopt. Like, did I understand that correct, that you said some of the first ones were more kind of grassroots, but now the city's adopted them and is investing in them themselves?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, we've invested in redoing a lot of the old kind of traditional rinks that the city operates. There's a whole bunch that the city operates, so that the landscaping is different, so that they can be used for pleasure and family skating. We have some partnerships with some community organizations where they provide food and hot chocolate, and we've got some fire pits and those kinds of things that make the area a little bit more welcoming and warm, and all of that has worked really, really well. We get, interestingly enough, every time there's a big snowstorm in Toronto, last year we didn't really have a big snowstorm, so it wasn't last year, but we always get all these media requests about, what to do in the parks in the winter. The last time I answered saying, well, snowballs and snowmen and all those things are pretty fun to do, just go out into the park and have fun. But there's also all that tobogganing and cross-country skiing, and you see people, in Toronto that really, really take advantage of, I think they take advantage of the weather regardless of whether it's hot or cold.
Well, that's the other extreme, right? Is that you can also just think about even outdoor seating, maybe you need heat lamps, but maybe you just need a blanket. Right? So if you just provide blankets and some coverage, and whether it be a Christmas market, and what we've seen in Copenhagen is that, the outdoor public life season used to be like from May to August. Right? And then shop owners and cafe owners would start putting their furniture out earlier in the spring, but provide the blankets, keep it out later in the fall, and sort of animate it in different ways, right? Just very incrementally, like add the open pit fire next to the cafe, whatever it might be. And now we see the season in Copenhagen is really like from February until the Christmas market. So then maybe there's some dark times there in January that not much is happening, people are tired, but otherwise we've just seen the sort of season extend for some things that you wouldn't imagine could happen in winter.
Right.
Right?
You know, we see, like, not necessarily just winter, but like we see some amazing things happening quite naturally in our parks in different times of seasons now. Like one of the things that was mentioned tonight was this whole phenomenon of pumpkin parades, which, you know, is, you know, traditionally, you know, October 30th, on 31st, on Halloween. And a couple of years ago, a community, you know, just started this thing where the day after Halloween, on November 1st, everybody brought out their pumpkins to the park and lit them. And there would be a walk through the park. It was great, really cool. And the only thing the city had to provide to help this happen was, you know, eventually we agreed to put a dumpster in the park. And it was a way that, you know, people, you know, this colossal thing every year about how you get rid of your pumpkin, right? It was taken care of, and there was also this event. Now I think this year we had it in 26 different parks.
Wow.
And so these are the kinds of things that I think, you know, regardless of the seasonality, people come up with ideas around the things that work.
But I think it's an interesting switch where the city isn't the doer. Right. As a city, you don't have to think of every great idea.
That's right.
You don't have to program everything. You can actually just be the facilitator.
That's right.
Right? Just allowing it to happen. And that's a shift, I think, that city government needs to be more comfortable with.
That's right.
Because there's a tendency to try to control and do it all.
Yeah, and that was our first tendency.
Right.
Right. So, you know, I think that as the city, you know, as the infrastructure of community involvement, you know, matures more naturally on its own through things like Friends of groups and community stewardship of, you know, both environmental and sort of activation things in parks. You know, we learned that the first answer, you know, isn't no.
Right.
Right. So we try to get to maybe as the first answer instead of just jumping to the no. And if we can get to yes first, then we're doing that much better. But it's taken time to change the culture around how you approach community involvement in parks. And there's great examples now in Toronto, and Parks People is a perfect, you know, organization as an example that has really worked to activate communities to take. You know, not so much control, but to ensure that, you know, the things they want happening in their parks are actually happening.
Right.
And it's become something that's happening not just downtown where it all started, where we had these sort of naturally involved community organizations. It's now gone to, you know, areas of the city that is.
We didn't know that community was really
We didn't know the community,
right?
and we didn't even know they liked parks.
Right.
Right. So you know.
That's really exciting. And I think now the trick is, as more and more people feel that, like I like to talk about usership rather than ownership.
Right.
Because when it's the public realm, once you start to own it, once it becomes mine, that could be a little dangerous, right? So rather than mine, it needs to be ours.
That's right.
And so the ours then is more about usership, making sure that everyone feels welcome and invited, whether they're part of the community group or they just happen to live in the community or they happen to visit from outside.
Yeah.
So I think that's the next kind of big challenge, is empowering those groups, but not making it become like not in my backyard kind of thing.
That's right. And we talked a lot tonight about balance and around how the different, you know, pieces need to come together, and that there needs to be that balance of all those uses and different sort of strategies. But we also hear from the public often around that need for balance in the way that parks are used and the way that they're designed. Yeah. And there's a great sort of, you know, we call it a strategic tension, you know, around the sort of naturalists and the sort of more, you know, conservative uses of parks as just sort of wilderness and nature and bird watching and trails and, you know, all those things versus, you know, the new movement of community involvement and activation.
Right. And can that coexist, or do you think that?
Yeah, I think it does coexist quite well. I think there's geography that helps it coexist quite well. Like, I mean, in Toronto, as an example, our ravine system, you know, there are huge trail systems through where, you know, there isn't any option.
And they feel quite wild and natural, don't they?
They
like
do.
You feel very far away from the city.
And we have environmentally, you know, significant areas that have been identified that, you know, you can't really, you know, even go so far as to put a piece of public art in there. So, I mean, there is some natural protection of those areas, but, you know, I think one of the big tensions that we always feel between groups is that sort of naturalist environment preservation, conservation versus increased use of parks,
Right.
and this fear from the environmentalists and the conservationists more, that we'll just use them to death, so to speak,
Right.
and we'll trample out all of the sort of indigenous species and
Yeah.
things that really create the ecosystem.
And
that
it
we
is
have.
a balance, just like you said, right? Because you have to have a place for those species to thrive. But I think the time where we thought of parks as just this green spot on a map or something to go
Yeah.
look at
Yeah.
has to be changing, right? We
Yeah.
have to be, I think the metrics maybe for how we measure
Yeah.
if parks are performing well or not are both related to, yes, is the indigenous species working, is the ecosystem intact, but has to also be balanced with, your point about, well, who's using it, who feels
Yeah.
invited, is
Yeah.
it used 24/7, is it used throughout the whole year?
And a perfect example of it is Corktown Commons, which is a fairly new park, and in this study is being used as an example as a portal park, and it is a sort of entrance to the Lower Don Trail system, or the Don River Valley Park, as it's now being called. I did a walk last year on the whole trail system, just because we were in the middle of, just wanted to see some things. And oddly enough, 2 weeks later, I went to use the park with my nephews, who are, this big and this big. And the playground in this park is unbelievable. I mean, the design is just so fantastic, and there's water play, and it was a hot day. And the park in itself is designed as a self-sustaining ecosystem. All the water regenerates through indigenous species all over the place, with just in this portal park. And I guarantee you that half the people using the children's playground didn't know that you could even access the trail system from it, which is fine, because I don't think they wanted to do that.
Right.
But it's a
maybe
good
they can in the
example of how
future.
it cannot. That's right.
Right.
Right. So it's an interesting example of how everything can work together if it's
Yeah.
designed
Yeah.
in the right way. And in this particular park, I think it was purpose designed to be able to do all those things.
Wonderful.